Namaste. Namaste and good evening. It's a real pleasure to be back in India, where 25 years ago I arrived and spent 6 very happy and productive years. My friend Ravi has asked me to share with you this evening some of the experiences and thoughts, particularly on setting up of American Express Company's Financial Resource Centre, a pioneer of shared services and outsourcing in India. As we know, shared services and outsourcing is immensely popular and successful, and because it's successful, there are many people claiming to be the parents, the fathers of shared services. If it had been a failure, it would have been an orphan. I looked at a resource, Wikipedia, I wouldn't normally recommend it, on the story of BPO in India, and I discovered that I was described as a veteran executive. I think they meant old when I came to India. I'm even older now. First, can I say, I agree with a famous person who said we're each created to do some definite service. Some work has been assigned to each of us that has not been assigned to anyone else. We may never know what it is in this life, but we will be told it in the next. We are each a link in a chain, a bond of connection between people. While I believe it was my destiny to come to India, I think you will agree when you hear the following, that it was an unlikely outcome. First, I left school at age 16 to take up a place in a naval college to become a seaman, like my father. However, I lasted exactly 1 day. There was an eyesight test. It was conducted in a long, dark room, about 20 to 30 meters long. At one end of the room, there was a mirror. At the other end of the room, there was a lantern. And the lantern shone pinpricks of light, green, red, and white, so that they were reflected on the mirror at the other end of the room. And you sat below the lantern and you looked at the mirror at the other end. And the examiner said, "What is the sequence of lights that you see?" And the sequence of lights were supposed to replicate a ship's light at night between 4 and 5 miles away. They were basically testing your eyesight for watchkeeping duties. So they said to me, "What sequence of lights do you see?" And I said, I'm sorry, I don't really see a sequence. They said, "We'll try another one." "What sequence do you see now?" I said, I'm sorry, I don't see any lights. Where are they? They said, "The lights are on the mirror." I said, "I don't even see the mirror." My eyesight was so bad. I failed, I flunked completely. So, end of my days in the Naval College. First failure. I returned to school. I threw myself into activity. I edited the school magazine, chaired the debating society, acted in plays, wrote poetry, everything other than academic study. The result was I did not gain enough qualifications to attend university. Second failure. A year later, after working as a clerk, I woke up. I went to college and then on to university, where I graduated with a good business degree and was invited to take up further study with a view to an academic career. Instead, I went to London and studied to become a chartered accountant with one of the then Big 5 firms, Robertson company, now absorbed into Deloitte. A life of auditing seemed to beckon. Two experiences during this period stand out in my mind and sparked off particular interests. First, I participated in a very junior role in the insolvency investigation of IOS, Investors Overseas Services, a mutual fund that had controlled billions of dollars of client money. It was operated out of a small town in France near the Swiss border and was to be a major cause of the financial crash of the 1970s. Exciting work and overseas travel. Second, I spent 6 weeks in Belize, formerly called British Honduras, a Central American country. I was auditing a British sugar industry subsidiary. Again, an exotic location. These were the only two foreign assignments I experienced, but I had the taste for more. On qualification as a chartered accountant, like 90% of my colleagues, I decided to leave the firm to find an exciting and better paid job. One of my previous clients had asked me to consider working as an accountant in his office in the Caribbean, the Bahamas, to be specific. I was momentarily tempted, but not ready to settle down in one location, however attractive. So I interviewed with several firms to become an international traveling internal auditor. For the interview with American Express, I wore the standard uniform. Dark suit, white shirt, tie and brightly polished shoes, and I carried a secret weapon. This was a copy of the Financial Times, the pink-colored broadsheet newspaper read by all top business people. I made sure it was suitably crumpled and under my arm as I walked into the interview room. I got the job, and I stayed with Amex for the next 22 years and never bought or read the Financial Times again. I loved internal auditing. It's like fishing. The lure of the unknown, reading the clues, following your nose, finding new things, opportunities or dangers, writing it all up in a precise and accurate way while being balanced and helpful. In total, I spent about 2/3 of my career auditing with American Express. At various times, I was based in the UK, in New York, and in Hong Kong. For the rest of the time, I traveled internationally. When I retired, I analyzed my logbook of flights. I had to keep a logbook of flights because tax officials wanted to know exactly what country I was in on a particular day. In total, I'd worked over in more than 30 countries, making an international flight once a week on average over 22 years. It's a lot of flying. My wife thinks it scrambled my brains. I think there may be an element of truth in that. It was as an audit manager with American Express that I first learned the principles of leadership. Aspects of the American Express, the Amex style that I particularly valued were the primacy of the company's blue box values, things like integrity, teamwork, quality, customer commitment, personal accountability, and a will to win. 360-degree feedback. This was a real novelty to me. Not only did your boss give you an appraisal once a year, but the people who worked for you gave you an appraisal. And not only did they give you an appraisal, but your colleagues and your customers gave you an appraisal. 360 degrees. Wonderful feedback. Not always good, but learning material, development material. Also, the varied and extensive employee communications and the well-thought-out processes for recruitment, assessment, and promotion. Two very dissimilar experiences taught me different lessons about values and processes that helped shape the person I became. I was still a quite new auditor, sitting in our Brighton, England office one morning doing administration, when my boss called me into his office and told me to fly immediately to Frankfurt in Germany, and then take a train to a small town called Böblingen, where a travel office clerk had just embezzled a substantial sum of money. I think it's about $70,000, if I remember correctly. I was to investigate and assist the local police. Gasp. It transpired that the lady had started borrowing money to fund a romance. And when she could not repay it, she borrowed more, then even more, using a technique known as teaming and lading, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, as we say. I had to go to court as an expert witness and explain, through an interpreter, a complex fraud involving dozens of falsified color-coded accounting vouchers. The yellow copies were debits, and the pink copies were credits. Not easy at all. The lady confessed and was found guilty. And one of the sad parts of the story is she tried to take her life. And the good part is that she wasn't successful. For me, it was a disturbing lesson in why internal controls are essential and protect from impairment both assets and good, but sometimes weak human beings. The interaction of systems, processes, and people was never clearer. Again, as a senior manager, I once questioned why a particular business area had not been audited. I was told that to schedule an audit, there had to be a preliminary meeting with the auditee. And the gentleman in this case could not afford the time for such a meeting. He was always busy in meetings, out of town, or otherwise engaged. How long has this stalling been going on, I asked. Almost a year. The auditee, in this case, was a much more senior manager than I, with lots of clout in the building. The building, incidentally, housed about 10,000 of Amex employees and was 51 floors. It was quite a building. What to do? In the end, I went down several floors, found his office. He was having a meeting, so I barged in. And I introduced myself, said I was new and just happened to be passing, and I needed an appointment to arrange a review of his area, and he meekly complied. Silos, stalling, and game playing are traditional sports in bureaucracies. They can kill you if you don't recognize them and tackle them. Another lesson learned. Now, India. I'll bet you thought I'd never get there. In the early 1990s, a new controller for American Express's TRS company, John McDonnell, came up with a very bold re-engineering proposal called Challenge for Change. It envisaged consolidating 46 separate major global processing centers throughout the world into 3 mega centers called financial resource centers. There was already a large accounting operation in Phoenix, Arizona, so they decided that is where the Financial Resource Center, the FRC for the Americas, should be. There was also one in England, which did work for Europe, so they said, that's Europe taken care of. That only left the site for the Asia, Pacific, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand region to be selected. Amex considered a number of locations for the new Financial Resource Center, and in particular it looked at China, Japan, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and India. The initial screen included things like receptivity to foreign investment, long-term strategic importance of the market for Amex, and the availability of economic and skilled labor. Then, For those countries that qualified, the considerations assessed during the final selection process included factors such as telecommunications, laws, regulations and taxes, business environment, transportation, and economic and political risk. It was a very, very thorough process. The official, needless to say, India won. You know that by now. The official decision would reference areas such as India's labour, its technology infrastructure, the low costs of doing business, and the readiness to adapt Western-style practices. That's very true. Dr. Manmohan Singh, the finance minister from 1991 to 1996, initiated economic reforms in India that liberalised the economy and encouraged foreign investment. I had the great pleasure of meeting both Dr. Singh and P. Chidambaram, who also served as finance minister. They were both very impressive men, keen to accelerate India's development as a major player on the global business arena. Another key reason for India's success was the effect an earlier business visit to India had on the worldwide controller, John MacDonald. Remember, he was the one that created the Challenge for Change project. He was hugely impressed with the quality of the Amex staff that he met in India. And at that time, American Express had been operating in India for just over 100 years. The quality, the intellectual brain power, the service orientation and the willingness to think outside the box convinced him that Indian employees were already world class. And he said to me on a number of occasions, it's got to be India. I don't care what they come up with, it's got to be India. And he was right. So, in December 1993, I came to India with a mission of creating a financial resource centre, or FRC. That meant gaining various permissions, obtaining a legal entity, acquiring export-oriented unit status, finding a building, fitting it out, obtaining reliable telecommunications and power, hiring and training 500 to 700 staff, including outstanding leaders. Some of the early leaders were people like Raman Roy, Ravi Ramakrishnan, Sanjay Gupta, creating policies and procedures, establishing compensation and benefits, and so on. When I came out to India, I just didn't come out as a single unit. We came out as a family with my wife, Goretti, who's here tonight, and our two children. The youngest, Seamus, was about 1 year old, and the older boy was just under 3 years old. One of my tasks, and perhaps, at least for me, one of the more significant ones, was communicating to all the people we hired our particular company culture and the American Express Blue Box values and our quality expectations. I made sure I personally taught a variety of orientation, training, and development programs. If you don't walk the talk, you won't have any talk. Why was I selected for this role? In retrospect, I imagine there were several qualities that recommended themselves. My audit training, for example, meant that I was able to evaluate risks. My accounting qualification meant I knew my debits from my credits, at least I should. Working in more than 30 countries and interacting successfully with senior headquarters management meant that I'd learnt to deal effectively with a variety of people. My psychological profiles also emphasized traits of teamwork, integrity, and strong delivery. I suppose the fact that both John and I had briefly worked together in audit more than 10 years earlier and respected, liked, and trusted each other did not do any harm. Interestingly enough, when I first met John, I didn't like him. I didn't get on with him, and it was reciprocated. John certainly didn't like me. It took us a couple of months and possibly 2 or 3 beers before we started to look at each other and began laughing at each other. And we've had a wonderful relationship ever since, but it certainly did not start well. Of course, while initially I may have been the only person on the ground in India for the FRC project, there was an army of specialist resource available regionally and in New York headquarters to call on. Experts in real estate, treasury, legal, human resources, telecommunications, and so on, and very supportive senior managers like John, Norm Thompson, Jim Askoff, and others. So, in less than 1 year, in November 1994, the FRC building was informally opened for the first 20 employees. 2 months later, it was formally opened by the president of American Express Company in the presence of a couple of hundred guests, including the controller, John McDonnell. In another year, the FRC had migrated much of the accounting systems from the Asia-Pacific, Japan, and Australia, New Zealand region, and was looking hungrily at opportunities in Europe and the Americas. I left India after 6 years at the end of 1999 to return to England to ensure my 2 sons, then aged 6 and 8, were able to slot into the English education system. So what are my abiding memories of my time in India, apart from Haldiram sweets? For all the colour, richness, and vibrancy of the culture, it is my colleagues that best sum up India for me. I was privileged, I say it again, I was privileged to work with some of the finest, most gifted and capable people I have ever known. We learned together and we grew together, sparking off each other, enjoying moments of tremendous humour and other moments, much fewer, of crisis, all the time building a successful business. Sure, there were plenty of challenges. I'd never heard the term brownout until I came to Delhi. The bureaucracy, a gift from the British Raj, can be truly demotivating and soul-destroying. There were always permissions to be got, endless delays, almost half the phones did not work during the monsoon, public transport for staff was a challenge, and so on. But for every problem, there was a solution. Once the brain power of the FRC leadership was focused, anything became possible. For example, to combat the issue of brownouts, we imported several 750 kilowatt diesel generators from Detroit in the United States. Because we were an export-oriented unit, we embedded these diesel generators in concrete and built a brick shed around them to house them securely, to the satisfaction of the customs department. One day, a passing official of the Municipal Corporation of Delhi noticed the shed. On checking, he identified that we did not have the specific permission required for the building, as technically it could house people. He properly insisted we demolish it or face a fine and imprisonment. On checking with customs, they were adamant that the building had been approved as secure housing for the generators and could not be demolished. To do so would risk fines and imprisonment. So get this, if we demolish it, we'll be fined and imprisoned. If we don't demolish it, we'll be fined and imprisoned. What could we do? Weeks of discussion and the goodwill of all parties saw a solution emerge. The buildings were rebuilt to exclude space for any possible accommodation, while the fixed roof was replaced with a movable one. Problem solved. The staff at the FRC were special. Carefully selected, highly motivated and well-trained. Many of them traveled throughout Asia-Pacific and Europe, working overseas for days, weeks, even months at a time to migrate work back to India. For them, that was a huge cultural challenge, and we had to increase our training accordingly. But the international experience added value and unique skill sets, enriching their work experience and value. In addition to the usual HR processes, most FRC applicants were interviewed by a senior leader and an HR representative using competency-based techniques. Although that is a time-demanding process, it was very insightful to see how candidates dealt with supplemental questions on a range of from glib and shallow to stumbling but authentic. In the background, the Amex Controllers Organization in New York staffed up to support the Challenge for Change project, and they began an information sharing initiative so that every finance employee worldwide knew about it. No one was ignorant of the tremendous opportunities that were soon going to be realized. And non-finance business leaders at all levels were similarly brought on board with support from the highest levels in the company. Not everybody was convinced that India was the correct answer. In fact, an awful lot of people were against India. To many people, India, if you thought of India, you thought of a backpacker. You didn't think of a business executive. India was an exotic, remote destination. Could it service the world? And John MacDonald told me some of the battles that he fought in our New York headquarters. Fortunately, he convinced a key person, a gentleman called Ken Chenault, who a couple of years after the FRC was built, became the chief executive officer and chairman of the company and visited the FRC a couple of times. And when you've got that level of support, I tell you, things are a lot easier, although that support was not easily won. In fact, American Express Finance created an entire department called Strategic Enablement Services for overseeing the Challenge for Change project, the re-engineering and the process improvement, and ensuring the success of the 3 financial resource centers. The group did, 1, it developed a strategy for migrating processes from countries into India. It mapped the processes and built detailed plans for migration, integrating technology and human resources. It coordinated with local and regional managements, agreeing specific actions and addressing issues as they arose. Why was this particularly difficult? It was difficult because when you migrate processes into one central hub, an awful lot of people are in danger of losing jobs. They're in danger of losing the power base that they have built over the years, and they resist. And sometimes a lot of the resistance is not factual, it's emotional. Fourth, they provided detailed training for the FRC staff in the relevant processes and overseas operation, and after migration, they consolidated and re-engineered processes. As time went on and the processes were being successfully migrated into New Delhi, the emphasis moved from re-engineering to process improvement. Within the FRC, we borrowed from the experience of the 2 already existing centres in Phoenix and Burgess Hill in the UK, as well as the expertise of our engineering and process improvement colleagues. In addition to having to introduce and frequently monitor various new metrics, there was a whole raft of disciplines that was totally unknown, certainly to me. Stuff like activity-based costing, total quality process improvement, business continuation planning, and we succeeded beyond our dreams in each of those areas. Why? Why? Why did we succeed? Very simply, because we did not know that we could fail. Failure was not on the agenda. We had setbacks. Sure, we overcame them. As a leadership team, we got together frequently. We took time to learn and to bond. We worked cooperatively. We enjoyed each other's company. We trusted each other. And we built each other up. More on this later. For some reason, Overseas colleagues were reluctant to come to India for business in the early days. And those that did preferred the security of five-star hotels. India was best seen as an exotic destination for backpackers rather than a business hub. Invited to give a presentation at the company's worldwide finance conference in the mid-1990s, I shared the achievements of the FRC East, our vigorous business model with dependable power and telecommunications, an emphasis on process improvement, robust and tested contingency plans, comparable numbers of qualified accountants to FRC West and Central, strong IT resource, great employee and customer metrics, unchallengeable economics, and a hunger for growth. The reaction of the listeners, 200-300 of them, was surprise and curiosity. It may be my imagination, but the number of visitors began to increase. In many ways, the FRC East was unique. The scale of operations, with hundreds of staff operating in a multi-shift environment, the extent of specialized F&A training both locally and in overseas markets, the scope of the work, end-to-end from financial capture to reporting and analysis, and global ownership of the entire world's worth of processes for such as reconciliations and payables. Not to mention the culture of continuous improvement and the pursuit of Six Sigma, thanks particularly to Ravi Ramakrishnan and Sanjay Gupta, who are both here tonight. In the 1990s, the internet was still in relative infancy, and many of the business opportunities were yet to be realized. Indeed, the internet was made for India. When you look at the developers and programmers for an application like Adobe Photoshop, there's hardly a non-Indian name to be seen. There is a lot of enablement and facilitation of BPOs, which is taking them to new, unheard of levels simply because of the existence and development of the internet. I think we have something like 400 companies doing BPO in India, over 100 of them in the Delhi, Gurgaon, Noida area alone. I've been talking about work. Outside work, there were some learnings too. For example, we had servants. Guards, a driver, cook, Mali, handyman, maids. Previously, my knowledge of servants had been limited to what I had read or seen on television, usually in programs about life 200 years ago. A new servant family from the south of India was introduced to my wife and I in our dining room. The couple approached us, knelt down in front of us, and touched our feet. What to do? The only time I'd seen something similar was old television footage when people approached the Pope, worldwide leader of Roman Catholics. So I gently laid my hand on the father's head and said, "Bless you." It seemed to work. Similarly, after work, we occasionally had training or communication sessions in a local hotel. At the end, there were refreshments, and then, when I was ready to leave, the music started. I soon learned that an event was truly successful only when it ended with dancing. As someone born with 2 left feet, this was a huge challenge for me. In fact, one of the most memorable evenings of my life ended with the men in a line at one end of the room, the women lined up at the other end. Then, in Bollywood style, one male singer would advance singing a challenge, while his supporters also advanced chorus style behind him. This would be countered by a female singer from the other side with her advancing chorus, meeting the challenge and causing the men to retreat. And so it went on for half an hour or so, each side advancing and then retreating in turn. Absolutely magical. Magical. Earlier, I said I would like to say a little more about business leadership and the achievements of the FRC's leadership team. In my opinion, it's just my opinion, there were 6 aspects critical to our success. First, a rather odd one. Leaders must learn to be humble. Whatever your merits, there is someone cleverer, wiser, prettier, more capable than you. You will never know it all. You will be learning all your life. And when there are successes, don't hoard the praise, share it freely. I've seen too many leaders who could be good become not so good because it went to their heads. For me, the value is being a team player. And I do believe that the value of a team is greater than the sum of its individual parts. So, humility. Second, and this is another rather odd one, and it's related to the first one. Don't be too quick to judge people. It may take weeks or even months to discover the depths of ability your colleagues have successfully hidden from you because you did not ask the right questions or made invalid assumptions. And never shoot the messenger. You'll have no messengers. A messenger with bad news is infinitely preferable to an abrupt surprise disaster. I think you'll agree there. Third, be tough. You will experience setbacks, even disasters. Deal with it. You know the saying, tough times don't last, tough people do. John MacDonald occasionally got frustrated with people who could not make up their minds. He borrowed the Nike slogan, just do it. Just do it. I don't think he ever paid them any royalties, but he certainly used the slogan a lot. 4, hire more capable people than yourself. And then don't micromanage them. Trust them. Get out of their way. But insist on good, frequent communications. Next. Create a positive, open, confident, respectful atmosphere. Communicate often and well. If you can't do it, hire someone who can. People will look to you to set the tone. 6, dream. Dream in the daytime. I don't mean sleep at work. I'm thinking of the quotation from T.E. Lawrence. All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake up in the day to find that it was a vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act on their dreams with open eyes to make them possible. Both John and Priyan were daytime dreamers and excellent leaders. Now I have become a vanaprastha, having reached the grand age of 70, and having a dodgy hip, may I be excused the dance tonight if there is one. I retired early, about 18 years ago, to enjoy my children's formative years, and for a few years I enjoyed being retired. I did things that took my interest. For example, I obtained a Cambridge University external qualification and taught English in a language school for a couple of years. The owners of the school thought that I had an impressive business background, so I was asked to specialize in foreign businessmen who wanted to learn English. What this translated into was East European gentlemen who wanted to know the details of the UK's value-added tax and corporation tax systems. I think they were looking for loopholes. Then I started an internet book-selling business with a small warehouse, selling books on various platforms such as Advanced Book Exchange, Abe, Amazon, and Alibris. It was tremendous fun, a huge learning. But as someone once said, it's a great way to make a small fortune. But first you have to start with a larger one. When I began, there were about 40,000 booksellers worldwide selling through the Abe website. 2 years later, everybody piled in and there were 90,000 booksellers and book prices almost halved as a result. I had my fun, so I closed that business. Always interested in writing, I took a master's degree in creative writing and authorship at the University of Sussex. Halfway through writing the world's best novel, it struck me that my ego was probably bigger than my ability, and there were many more capable writers who deserved success before me. So that half of the novel remains in my computer. Do you remember the quote I used at the beginning? A famous person said that we are each created to do some definite service. Some work has been assigned to each of us that has not been assigned to anyone else. We may never know what it is in this life, but we will be told in the next. One of the advantages of being retired is that you're free to volunteer your services. My wife Gretchen and I have worked with various charities, particularly those that support the elderly or homeless, and for 3 years I volunteered as an editorial assistant on a religious newspaper of the counties of Sussex and Surrey, a small staff of us producing 12,000 copies a month, writing again, you see. 2 years ago I became editor. I believe this work has been assigned to me, and I expect to find out for sure in the next life, but I'm in no hurry to enter the next life to find out. The same wise man also said, to live is to change, and to be perfect is to have changed often. So, if I have a final message for you, it's just that. Be prepared to change and grow. There is a definite service that has been assigned to you, and you only, and enjoy life. Thank you.
This was just mesmerizing. I think, as like the console and the timer, we lost track of the time. It was so insightful to hear you. Some of the messages were so powerful. I think we will replay a few times to absorb more and more and more. And we may talk to you a little later about even compiling into a journal or a note, which we'd like to make available to all of us to read later. With this, I would request once again you to come, please, here, and I request Mr. Sunil Sayal to pass on a moment of gratitude to you for sparing an evening with us and sharing such an insight with us, Harry.